This week I saw a church sign that had been posted and put on Facebook. It had an invitation. The sign read, "If you like to sin, please come and join the choir at 6:30. We've all come together, sinners, this morning to worship God together. Today's passage of scripture from the gospel is not an easy passage to preach from. As I was looking through sermons and research, one of the things I discovered is apparently it's a passage of scripture that people really want to avoid. There was very little commentary. There were very few sermons. It was a topic that people were wanting to avoid. And quite frankly, I was a little bit tempted to do that as well. But then I began to dig into the passage and look at it in comparison to the words that James offers to us. The story that we read today is really two stories and two incidences of Jesus healing. The second part of that passage was the healing that I was talking to the children about, the healing of the deaf person where the people bring him to Jesus. The first story is the one that is much more difficult to figure out and to handle. It's the story of a desperate mother. Now, those of you who are parents know, or grandparents, or have served in any kind of a parenting role, know that if something is wrong with your child or your grandchild, you'll do anything to get the help that they need. We would walk to the ends of the earth. This is the woman that we are introduced to. She's a Syro-Phoenician woman. It means the part of the Syria that she is from. It is a part of the world that is totally, although it is close geographically to Galilee and the place where Jesus and the disciples and all are from, it's like being in a place totally different. There was a great deal of prejudice between these two groups of people on both sides. From the side of the Jews, the Gentiles, as this would have been, were not looked upon to have the favor with God that they had. And so there was this sense of prejudice that that which was given to them as the children of God was not given to others. And at the same time, the Greeks had their own prejudice against the Jews. They weren't looked upon nearly as well because the Greeks were the great philosophers, and they were the people who of great wisdom and the people of the great mind and reasoning, and no one else had that as well as they did. They really didn't understand one another, and even though they're in close proximity to one another, they're worlds and worlds apart. You know, we can be worlds and worlds apart from other people, even that are close to us, people that live right next door to us. We don't know anything about them. Or we assume things about people perhaps that we don't know. So Jesus, at the beginning of this reading, he's in need of rest. He wants to be alone so he can unwind. And so he goes off into Tyre, this portion that is not a familiar territory, and we find him entering a house alone. And this woman comes to Jesus. The scripture says she kneels before Jesus and begins to beg him to heal her daughter, to cast out the demon for which she is possessed. She wants more than anything to have what she has heard that this Jesus is able to do. My guess is she's been a lot of places before she's come to Jesus with no results. So out of desperation, she comes. And Jesus makes a remark to her that many do not like. We don't like that Jesus calls her a dog. It could be a slur. It could be a prejudice thing. It could be a way in which he was referring to her as one outside of the graces of Judaism. It also could be the fact that she was a woman, lower than the dogs. Now you have to understand, in that culture, in that time, dogs were not pets. They were not these lovely, great pets that we have all become accustomed to. The dogs were wild. The dogs were rough. The dogs were those things who did come into the midst and roamed round about and perhaps sometimes ate the crumbs at the bottom of the tables that got thrown by the children who ate there. And as she's making this request of Jesus, she's begging him. When Matthew tells the story, she has been following Jesus. And she has been constantly crying out for Jesus to do something. So apparently Jesus has ignored her for quite a while. And when he makes this comment to her, her comment back is amazing. She said, "Yes, but even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the table." I'm not asking you, God, Jesus, that I be your inner circle. I'm asking for the graces that I know is there that falls from this table. In essence, Jesus is saying to her, go, leave. Your daughter has already been healed. But he says to her, by his words, you are welcome at this table. This is a table of God's grace and love. Another one of these teachings of Jesus who teaches us that all of us are welcome around God's table. We are all, no matter who we are, welcome to come and to receive of God's grace and love and forgiveness. Sometimes we need to hear the words of those whom we would call the strangers. Those whom we don't know that well. Maybe some whom we have our own ideas about, whether it's prejudice or we put them in a box to be everybody who is this, is these things. We make boxes for people. And we have expectations that everyone in that box. And often what we need to do is to hear from one another. The strangers who are in our midst. Maybe those strangers are in the midst of this community and we need to hear what the needs are. But maybe the strangers sit every week in the pews with us. Maybe not as involved as you are, perhaps, in activities, and we don't hear their thoughts or their words or their ideas. Jesus is asking, and by example showing us to open ourselves up beyond our prejudices, beyond our thoughts, and receive from one another and offer God's grace. When I was an associate pastor in Marshall, Missouri, and I understand that Roy's daughter went to the college there, I decided one of my responsibilities was the youth, and all of the education for that matter. And I decided that we needed to take these kids that were pretty much small town America, good kids, but most of them were not exposed to other cultures or to other ideas that much. Now, these were like 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And so we designed a trip to Kansas City. And we were going to, one of the poorest areas of Kansas City. We would take a tour, and we were going to a mission where students would gather during the summer in a summer program. And we had all of these things that we were going to do. We were taking food. We were going to take our thoughts and our ideas. And I wanted them to see kids who lived differently. But what we found was not what our eyes thought we were going to take. When we arrived at the mission, the first thing they said is, "Oh, we're so excited to see you. We've prepared some things for you." And they broke the kids, and there was about 40 of them. They broke them into different small little groups, had them sitting on the floor, and then they divided into the groups, and they taught them how to play jacks. None of these kids had ever played jacks. And in the process of that, they began to talk to one another and to share with one another. They began to see things from a different perspective. The rural kids and the small-time rural kids and the city kids began to share back and forth. We thought we would provide a lunch for them, and they said, oh no, we've provided a lunch for you. And so we sat down, and together we interacted with one another. I thought, wow, this is really great. And then they got up and said, oh, we have one more surprise for you. We've written our own play, which we're going to produce for you. And they had a stage in the area. The kids all sat together as they shared with us the play that they had written for us to observe. It was in opening ourselves up to the strangers among us. Different ways, different thoughts, different ideas. As we began to share, this was a church operated program. We began to see how God's grace comes to us in so many different ways. And while we thought we were the ones that were the rich ones who could offer, we discovered they were the rich ones who gave to us. In this encounter with this woman, the likelihood is she was not a poor woman. She had means by which she could seek out all kinds of help. As Jesus crosses those barriers and crosses the cultural barriers, crosses the barriers of what had traditionally been the ideas of the Jewish faith. He shares with her and with us the wisdom that the table is open to everyone. No matter who we are, God's grace is open to all. God's love awaits for all of us.